we should discuss this one last week actually. So before we go to discuss about demand forecasting, uh, it is important to know that supply chain management, as we discussed earlier, we have three main flow that we manage in the supply chain. First one is the chains from the supplier up until to the end customer. The second one, alongside with the goods flow or the service flow, there is a financial flow. So whenever you receive goods or products from your chain entities in the supply chain, let's say you purchase raw material from your supplier, so that you need to return back in terms of the financials. You need to pay them some amount of money for the service or the goods that they provide. So the final things is to make sure the data or the informations flow alongside the supply chain. That's why we discuss a little bit about the supply chain data. Uh, let's go to see about this one a little bit, review a little bit from what we already discussed in the previous module. Supply chain modeling consists of several steps, several formative steps that is common before we apply the modeling techniques that we are going to use to solve the problems that we identify. So like what you already see in the previous modules, supply chain modeling being studied for your typical problems that you want to discuss here. So that's why formulate the problems here means that to understand the problems and then to formally define what were actually being discussed, and then what were the objective, what were the constraints and stuff. And then you move on to collect data. This one, collect data and analyze the problem is two parallel steps that you may found in alongside when you try to use the supply chain modeling approach. So let's say like this. Okay, let's say you are going to you already formulate the problem is that, oh, I want to optimize the inventory, the number of inventory that I need for my supply chains, for my companies. For example, oh, this type of products, I need to have this level of inventory. So in order to decide that one, before you create the models and calculate the optimal number of inventory, of course, you need to collect the data, several data such as how many demands you have in the periods that you want to fulfill. And then in order to check also, you need to know the constraint. For example, oh, my warehouse would only be able to store this amount of inventory. Or you can also need to check the type of products that you want to store, where goods to or can only be stored in how many periods, for example. So that's why before you generate the models for alternative solutions here, you need to collect data. And then after that, you can evaluate the design and alternative, and then select among those design. Finally, this is a repetitive process, so that from the designs that you are going to use, you can evaluate it again, and then if there is another problems appear, you can check it back. Okay, this is another review. So in a supply chain modeling, especially supply chain analytics approach, we have three types of approach that are being discussed here. For example, in today's topics, actually, we are going to cover this one, the predictive analytics, in which you are going to use several forecasting techniques. This one, forecasting techniques here. We're just going to discuss the conventional approach, in which like the time series forecasting approach or causal relationship between one variable to another variables, the forecasting approach. But before that, actually, you need to be able to do this one to understand the problems itself before you can predict it, the amount of the variables. You need to understand the characteristic of the data. That's why you need to implement the descriptive analytics approach here. Okay. For example, you need to, in order to, let's say, understand the pattern of the demand, you need to able to visualize it using some visualization tools, right? So this kind of approach were studied in descriptive analytics approach. And these are the explanations. I don't think I would like to repeat it again. It's just a more detailed explanation about each of those approach. Okay. And this one, I think this is a quite important frameworks that you may want to check if you're going to apply, especially the predictive analytics approach. There are a lot of framework wins a step-by-step process on that were being formalized as a best practice on how to implement some things, right? It's called a framework. So for this one, a supply chain analytic frameworks, it means that, okay, if you want to apply the supply chain analytics tools, you can follow these step by steps. Okay, one of the frameworks that is quite famous, known as the CRISP-DM, which stands for the cross-industry standard process for data mining. So as you recognize from the name here, it's actually being designed for data mining process. Okay, so this framework consists of 6 phases. Six phases that describes we call it data science life cycles. So it means that there are 6 phases that you need to do it well before you that's naturally become part of the process when you want to apply this framework. So let's zoom in a little bit. So this one. Zoom. Oh, this one. This one. Okay. So the first part is have a proper business understanding, right? It's quite similar with what we have discussed earlier. Business understandings or problems understandings, and then soon after that you can collect data and understand those data. Then after you understand it, this may be part of the descriptive analytics. Okay, and then you prepare. Okay, before you use it for the modeling. So for example, if you want to do a forecasting, let's say just a simple forecasting, you need to understand what data you are going to forecast, which will be the independent variable, which one will be the dependent variables. Okay, so those and then another things is that, okay, if there are missing data, what would you do? Okay, this is called data pre-processing. Okay, this part also quite important. Okay, And then you select the models that you are going to use, and you notice here there is a go and back and forth arrow, means that if somehow if your model doesn't work yet very well, you need to repeat several steps. Like, let's say, oh, this one missing some data, so you need to repeat to the data preparations. Okay, and after that, if you already done it well, you go to the evaluation process. And before the deployment, before decided it will be deployed in your sites or your practical day-to-day operations, you need to really evaluate it well. If not, means that you need to it sometimes go back to the first cycle, which is the business understanding. Okay, so those are the steps of CRISP DM. So I guess that okay. So if later on you need to write, if you need to use this let's say data mining tools or forecasting tools, you can use these frameworks, let's say for your thesis report and stuff. Okay. Okay. Now recognize that business understandings would need a lot of data. Of course, it is obvious that the role of data in the supply chain will be very much necessary nowadays, especially when you are going to conduct operational decision as well as the tactical decisions, including also strategic decisions, which I already discussed in the first meetings. We have several type of decisions can be taken when you have supply chain problems. So in that case means you need to understand the types of data, the source of data, the category of data that you are working on. Okay, and nowadays the trends of data that we have is more and more go to the type of big data applications. So big data, what does it means? Big data, it really a terms that represents data in terms of we normally use the terminology of 4 feet. Okay, data considered as a big data if they somewhat belong to these 4 feet characteristics. Either it's in terms of their volume or how large the scale of those data. So sometimes we need to extract from data that is very large in terms of the size. Okay, let's say it can be hundreds or thousands of videos, for example. So you need to deal with when you need to deal, let's say, like what kind of data we need to deal with videos. Okay, let's find the example later on. But volume represents how large is those data or the scale of data. Varieties represents the you may deal with the data in various forms. Okay, and then velocity represents that you may collect those data in a very fast lead time. So means that, okay, each second you generate, even though the data is small, but let's say each second you generate thousands of data, means that the velocity of generating those data were big. So those are the data also considered as a big data. And then finally, the veracity means the certainty of the data that we may generate. Okay. And finally, is about more details about the role of data in supply chain model. You could also check from these silos of data. For example, you can check from the data that generated in the supplier sides or in the production side, or the data based on the inventories, or data generated by your sales departments, okay, and the data generated from your customers, okay. And the topics that we are going to discuss next were mostly related to the data generated from the customer. Okay, it really depends on your perspective in the supply chains. The customer can be well, for a supplier, the customer will be the manufacturer, right? For a manufacturer, the customer can be the retailers. Okay, so demand forecasting, it really represents what are it normally being utilized to make decisions about what you are going to produce or prepare for your service to the next entities in your chain. Okay. Okay, so this also important. Understanding the type of data in terms of the statistics property. So it can be a nominal type of data, ordinal type of data, interval type of data, ratio type of data. Each of them you need to understood because it represents the characteristics of this data. Okay, this would be the theory about data exploration, visualizations, bar chart, box plot, pie chart, which I think you already known earlier. And then now it's just like try it and then see what's is the best, what kind of visualization approach work the best for which type of data that you are going to analyze. Okay, so this will cover the first part, like in order to select the model. For example, for demand forecasting, if you are going to select a model, you need to explore the data first, understand it, if possible use several visualization tools which are being explained earlier, to get a proper understanding about those, what are those data, and then how does it contributes to your process. Okay. Okay, I promise you to explain about K9. However, I didn't have time to prepare it yet. So maybe after this class finish, I will send you some video about how to install, how to do the data explorations. Because today what we are going to focus is to move on about discussing about the demand forecasting, which is in the module. Okay. Okay, maybe up until here, let's stop a little bit. Stop recording.